Live struggle legacy. It's a whole movement.
Hey everybody, it's your boy MP, Live Struggle Legacy, and welcome to the Live Struggle Legacy Podcast, Episode 2. So if you haven't already, if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification button. If you're following us on your favorite streaming platform, make sure you hit that follow button. And if you could turn on those notifications, make sure you do so you can catch all the latest content from Live Struggle Legacy. Now in episode 1, we talked about the history behind the Live Struggle Legacy movement. So if you're not up to speed, make sure you check out episode 1. In episode 2, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my live struggle. So I'm going to probably break this down into several different episodes because I got a hell of a story and I'm about to share it with you all right now on this platform. So where does my live struggle begin? What makes me MP? Born Michael Paul Maiello Jr. in Scottsdale, Arizona in 1984, September 20th. Virgo season, y'all. So I'm going to take you all way back to my history and as far back as I can take you with my family history, because I think that's a little bit important in understanding who I am as your host, recording artist, and curator of Live Struggle Legacy. So I can't go way back. I can only go back to my grandparents. My father was born in upstate New York, and his parents were both Italian immigrants. Well, first generation. Their parents came over from Italy through Ellis Island, as a lot of people did in around, I'd say 1900, because my grandfather was born in 1913. But way back then, Italian was not the thing to be. So it kind of hurts me in my heart to know this, but I love my grandma with all my heart. And my grandmother, she would not allow Italian to be spoken in her home. She was a French teacher. She was one out of 9 brothers and sisters who went to college. They all chipped in. They chose one sibling to go to school. Her oldest sister was born in Italy. She was the only one out of the brothers and sisters, my aunts and uncles. So my grandmother went to school, Michelina di Coco, to be a teacher. She taught French, Italian, and Spanish at a middle school. And everybody else in that area, all the Italian immigrants, there was only one place to work back then, and that was General Electric, the plant. So, factory work. And her brothers, they weren't having it. They wanted more. They came over to this country for opportunity, and that was not it for them. So they got involved in sports betting. And between her brothers, my uncles, and that stigma of just being an Italian immigrant, she did not permit Italian to be spoken in the home. She taught my father, my aunt, and my uncle all French. So why am I going this deep? Because I think it's important to understand who I am and where I come from in order for you to understand me as your host. So I used to really frown upon gambling, because I thought about, I had an uncle that lost everything and, he didn't do too well, as we all probably know somebody who, had issues with gambling, like drugs. It's an addiction. But in retrospect, my uncles had a restaurant called Di Coco's Luncheonette in upstate New York. And they had some of the best Italian food you could get, probably in the whole state, not just upstate. And they had a football club, and that football club provided community, but it also provided opportunity. You pool in a little bit of money, and if you were responsible enough, you could win big. Well, my uncle did get a little too big for his britches, and he expanded into other cities. He got involved with a character known as Meyer Lansky, who a lot of y'all I'm sure have heard of, and he made it in the news time and time again for, not all good things. But I'm grateful for my uncle and what he did for our family, because he used sports betting to create opportunities and to give the family a little bit more than they would have had, say, as factory workers. Right, so that's a little bit about my grandmother's side, who happened to die when I was 3, but I remember her like yesterday, because she would sing to me in the crib. Those are my earliest memories, 3 years old, and she would sing to me in French. But my grandfather, who I actually named my son after, his name was Raphael Mayella, and he was born in 1913, and he was one out of, how many brothers and sisters is he? I want to say 5 brothers and sisters. I didn't really know all my aunts and uncles, but he left home at 15. They were dirt poor and ignorant, fresh off the boat from Italy. And he had to go find opportunity. This is during the Great Depression. Remember, he was born in 1913, so 1915 made it right around the time of the Great Depression. So we were raised a little bit different, having my grandfather having survived the Great Depression, and he did what they called way back when riding the rails. If you don't know what that means, that's like in the movies when they jump on a train. They literally just jump on a moving train. That's how he found opportunity. He jumped on a train from New York and rode it all the way down to Tennessee and found work in something called the Civilian Conservation Corps. Some of y'all might know it. Well, your grandparents probably know it as the CCCs, the Civilian Conservation Corps. And he became a steel worker. And he worked his ass off his whole life to create opportunity. And so when he met my grandmother, I couldn't tell you how they met, but they were all about the American dream, and they loved the concept of America as this land of opportunity, right? As so many immigrants did. So, they were all about the English language and not the Italian language. So I didn't grow up here in Italian, except for a little bit of cursing. And then my one auntie, Vincenz, she would grab my cheek and she would say, "Come sei bella, come sei bella." That's the only Italian that I heard in my home. But in my grandparents' home, excuse me. So this was in upstate New York. So let me tell you a little bit about my father. I'm a junior. My father's Michael Paul Maiello Sr. He was something like a jock, a football star, baseball star, super active, an entrepreneur. I mean, he had a paper route. He bought his own football gear, he had way back then, before recording studios, they had a band room. He had everything in it. My pops played guitar, drums, all that, and was an athlete. But in the neighborhood, my family had a little bit of a name. My dad could have worked everywhere, anywhere, at any of the restaurants. They were the wise guys, right? But my dad wasn't too fond of that. He wanted to make his own way. So I don't know too much of how he got his start, but I know that he went to what he considered the land of opportunity, which was AZ, Arizona, Douglas Nogales, right on the border by Tucson. And he found his way through the weed game as a college student at ASU. He funded his own trip out to ASU and actually got involved in film. He was a French major, of all things. And he made a connection with a man known as David Weissman, who actually happened to be my sister's godfather at one point. But David was a filmmaker. He needed funding. My father got into the movie business as a result. He had the paper, and David had the Hollywood connections. They got into directing, producing films, right? But the whole purpose of my father going to AZ was to make his own way. He didn't want to live in the shadow of his uncles. He wanted to become his own man. In the process of doing that, he met a man who told him that he had a woman that he wanted him to meet. And my daddy had a thing for redheads. And it just so happened that this woman was a redhead. It was actually one of my dad's best friend's secretaries, a redheaded woman by the name of Marguerite. And they met at a party in Los Angeles, a Hollywood party, where my mom was actually my dad's best friend's secretary. And at the time, my dad was doing his thing. You know, he was balding. And he met my mom. My pops was already in the film business, you know, doing his thing. Had already graduated from ASU. And the party started. My mom, I'll tell you about in a moment. But yeah, this is a good time to segue into Marguerite, my mother. So my mother is a St. Pete native, St. Petersburg, Florida. And if I tell you a little bit about her parents, I don't know that much about her parents. I know that my grandfather, I never had much of a relationship with on my mother's side because my grandfather and my mother never really spoke her whole life. Now, my grandmother is my only surviving grandparent to this day, an incredible woman by the name of Barbara. And so she had my mother at 17, which back then was pretty young. Today, that's pretty young. And my mom was, bright red hair, freckles, and a wild child. My grandmother had been in several marriages and took on every child from every marriage. My blood aunts and uncles, let's see, I have my mom, 2 uncles, and 2 aunts. So that makes, 5 siblings, but then a whole bunch of step siblings in the entire neighborhood. They all grew up on St. Pete Beach. So my granny was one of those women who took care of everybody around her and was a really hardworking, independent woman. I don't know how she managed to raise all these kids and still be a very successful, independent businesswoman, all as a single mom. So, I mean, my granny is one incredible, powerful woman, and her husband, I don't even think they were ever married. My grandfather, my mother's father, his name was Doug Spieler. We lost him in 2018. He passed away, and I was just starting to have a relationship with him. But he was born in St. Louis, raised in St. Petersburg. And honestly, I don't know much more about either side of that family. I know that he had some Cherokee Indian in his blood and some Italian, but I don't even know where they came from or when. I know my grandmother's family on my mom's side came over from, I want to say Scotland into Pennsylvania. But my mom was like a hippie wild child. She left home at 17 in St. Pete, and she went out to Cocoa Beach, Florida, as like a surfer chick where the waves were, if you're from St. Pete area, we don't get waves. So she moved out to Cocoa to surf and was like a night DJ for a radio station. And so, I couldn't tell you much about what happened in between, but I know 2 years later when she was 19, she met my father in Los Angeles, and the rest is history, y'all. So my father was doing this thing in the film business, and he flew my mom out to the Cannes Film Festival in France. If you're a film, aficionado, then I'm sure you're familiar with the Cannes Film Festival. And that's where my sister was conceived. I have an older sister, Pauline, who was really like a parent to me growing up. I mean, really, she was everything and made every good choice that I didn't make. She's one incredible woman, and I'll touch on her in a moment. But I'll never forget, my mom was something like a party girl. No disrespect to my mom. She is who she is, and there's no shame in her game. But I'll never forget when I was doing time and I was locked up. I don't remember what my sister and I were talking about, but I called, and out of nowhere, my sister said, "Michael Paul, is our mom an OG trap queen?" And I had to sit there and think about it. I'm like, damn, you know something? She was. My mom is the OG trap queen. So my mom was a party girl and my dad was the party. I'll never forget. I might not should be saying some of this, but I mean, it is what it is. This is the story, y'all. This is what you're here for. My dad went to that party with a pocket full of cocaine and a pocket full of Quaaludes, and the rest was history. Next thing you know, they're on a flight to France for the Cannes Film Festival, where they conceived my sister. My sister was born in Scottsdale, Arizona, and 3 years later, or I should say less than, they were in another film festival in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where I was conceived. So you talk about an interesting mix. My sister was conceived in France, and I was conceived in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So all with this big party that my dad was throwing for my mom, just living their best life. So, I'm going to be real with y'all. Like, a lot of y'all might not know this about me. A lot of y'all might know me from the streets, from the music. Some of y'all might know me from prison. Some of y'all might know me from school. But life started off real peachy. And then it got a little bit ugly. But when I was a young child, my life was amazing. I lived in a paradise in Arizona. My dad was a multi-millionaire. And he owned 40 acres in the desert. I grew up at the foot of the Superstition Mountains on top of a hill where we could walk a quarter mile and see Indian hieroglyphics. I should say First American, not Indian. We all know that. First American hieroglyphics from the Navajo tribe. I would walk out in my backyard and find arrowheads. Across the mountain, he had a ranch, Spring Creek Ranch, where we had horses. When I was 4 years old, I was riding horses. I had a nanny. We had maids. My mom had it made. She was basically, living her best life, and we were just little kids in the desert not knowing what we had, right? In the middle of Gold Canyon, Arizona, right outside of a little suburb called Apache Junction. But, the party went on for a while. And, growing up, I didn't have a lot of friends because my dad was doing his thing. Like, who knows what he was into, but we weren't really allowed to have people at the house. So when I saw my family, we'd go to St. Pete Beach for the summers and rent a house right there by the Don Cesar, if you're familiar with St. Pete Beach. And then every winter we'd go to New York and have a white Christmas with my grandparents, and then my grandfather when my grandmother passed. But so we were living this incredible, extravagant lifestyle. Well, I'll never forget, I had one friend in the neighborhood. It wasn't really a neighborhood. It was in the middle of the desert. The closest neighbor was probably almost 2 football fields away. And then about a quarter mile down the hill, I remember these people moved in. It was kind of an odd couple. It was a Native American woman and a German man. I can't remember their names, but their sons were my only friends, Time and Ariel. And it was a German boy and then a Native American boy. So I think they had different, from different marriages or something like that. Because let me just tell you this, they look nothing alike. But I'm telling you this because those were my only friends as a child in the desert. And I'll never forget one day I was down there at their house, which is at the bottom of the hill, and my dad lived on top of the hill. And I remember this clear as day. I was probably 6 years old. And I remember looking at the top of the hill and seeing all these black SUVs and wondering what the hell's going on. And then, I remember my mom saying, stay over there for a little while. I remember she called my friend's parents. I'm 6. I don't know what's going on. And I just remember I didn't want to go home anyway because I was brought up, just to give you a little side note, I was brought up on, organic food, and I wasn't allowed to eat fast food. I wasn't allowed to drink soda, chocolate, sugar, none of that. Everything we ate was from our kitchen. But I'd go down to my friend's house and they'd have that Wonder Bread and they'd have, Oscar Mayer ham and the Kool-Aid with the pop top. And I thought I was in heaven. I thought my parents were evil by depriving me of this deliciousness. Little did I know it was poison. And now I'm grateful for my parents having, raised me like that, but I didn't know better at the time. So I'm happy to see that they're saying stay late. Or I get to eat a ham and cheese sandwich. I get to drink a pop top Kool-Aid, right? Well, I remember it had to be probably 9 or 10 o'clock at night when my mom finally came and got me. And I remember going into my room and it was tore apart. And my mom already, she's a little bit thrown, so I'm thinking, Mom, what the hell did you do? Looking at my sister was at her other friend's house. She had a friend who lived in town in Apache Junction, and she was at her friend's house by the grace of God, because, I'm a spiritual person the older I get, and I know things are meant to happen. We never were at friends' houses, and it just so happened that night, I was at my friend's house, and my sister was at her friend's house. We weren't meant to see this. Those SUVs, those black SUVs, they were the DEA. They kicked in my mom's door, laid my mom down on the ground with machine guns, and flipped our whole room, tore our whole house apart, looking for my dad and looking for incriminating whatever they thought my dad was into. So my daddy already was out on business a lot. So now it's like we don't see him at all. Pops is on the run, so we don't know that yet. We just know Dad's out on business, right? This is in Arizona in Gold Canyon. So 6 years old. And right around that same time, my friend that lived down below, Ariel, he called the house. He's like, yo, he's like, I just seen some jackass on TV on America's Most Wanted with the same name as you. I'm like, what? So at the time, I'm just thinking it's weird. Like I don't know what's going on, but I'll never forget it was a Bulls game on at that moment. It's crazy how you remember certain things. As I was a huge Michael Jordan fan, and it was a Bulls game on. I wasn't worried about what he had to say. I was thinking about this Bulls game, and so fast forward a few years later, my mom sat us down and she had to tell us that, your father is on the run. He's a fugitive, right? That's when I learned what a fugitive was before the movie, right? So if you've seen it, yeah, this is real life. This ain't no movie. So my dad was on America's Most Wanted, and it wasn't like they had one of those whole specials on him. It was like, at the end of America's Most Wanted, and they say like, have you seen this person? Have you seen this person? And well, they just so happened to slap a picture of my dad and my name, I'm a junior, on there, and that's what, the homie was calling about. So, but I didn't realize that until way later on. So, and then of course family say, oh yeah, but you heard him, he was on America's Most Wanted, whatever. So, now we got to make a decision, right? So all my mom's family's in Florida. We had to pack it up and find a place in Florida. And so, who knows what life would have had in store, because my dad had no intention of turning himself in. I mean, he was a multimillionaire. He was going to move us out to Argentina and buy land or whatever else may be. But it just so happened that his best friend, who was like an uncle to me, called him and told him to meet him at the 7-Eleven on St. Pete Beach. So my pops went over there to actually do him a favor. And when he showed up, it was a setup. DEA, boom, boom, boom. They grabbed my dad, shacking him down. And back then it was Morgan Street in Tampa. If you've been in Fed, that it was a motherfucking dungeon. Morgan Street, right in downtown Tampa. That's where they had my dad. They got him. And then I remember, when my mom broke the news, and it was an emotional moment, they got him. He was facing serious charges, punishable by potentially life in prison. And so, life changes fast. So, back then they used to like furlough you, and they don't do that shit anymore. But I remember he got out on like some kind of a furlough. They gave him an ankle monitor so he wouldn't run. We got to spend a little bit more time in Arizona while we like wrap things up. And then we had to make a choice, either go to New York with my father's family or Florida with my mother's family. And New York wasn't really an option because, they're all Italians. My mom's a redheaded Irish woman, so, my mom wasn't trying to go through all that. They would have gave my mom hell. Of course she wants to be with her family. So that's where life completely changed for me. I went from being this kid who had completely out of touch with reality, growing up with nannies and maids, to growing up in South St. Pete, right? Where I don't know anything about anything. I'm so green, like I don't know shit. And I remember the one thing that my dad did before he went away, and probably the best thing he could have done for my social life growing up, is he put in a slab of concrete and a basketball goal. And that was like my end with the community. People would just come over. I had the nicest little basketball goal in the whole neighborhood. And I built my social life off that. I know people to this day from that basketball court. So, that kind of put me on the map in terms of South St. Pete and growing up in South St. Pete. But I'm not gonna lie, y'all, it was rough. I mean, you talk about rags to riches, shit. We went from riches to rags. And my mom, I've been hard on my mom my whole life, but when I look back and see what my mom had to endure because my dad gave her this lifestyle that there was no way one could sustain, having lost everything, because the feds took everything from us. The feds took, I'm not going to put an exact number on it, but millions and millions of assets from my father, and left us with just enough to get by. I mean, it was enough for him to be able to buy a home in St. Pete and set my mom up with this little nut. But how are you going to take this woman that you spoiled for all these years with all these extravagant things and then say, okay, raise these two kids. There's no money for nannies. Make this money last. My mom blew through that money. My mom blew through that money so fast. And I had to start seeing things that, a young person probably shouldn't see. So I had to start growing up fast. In my mind, I was the man of the house. My dad went away when I was 9. And at that time, I felt like the man of the house. I was actually 8. I had my 9th birthday right after my dad went fed. And, I had my big sister, but, we're fighting all the time. And my mom, this is where she's from. She had all her high school friends. She had to cope. My mom went out every night. And, my first introduction to drugs, I'm not going to lie, I was seeing things I shouldn't have seen. But one thing I could say about my parents, they never did anything in front of me, ever. Anything I saw was because I was being nosy. And at that age, shit was rough. I was depressed. I lost all my friends from this perfect world, and I'm in this place where I know nobody, and I literally can't step outside of the house without getting punched in my mouth and robbed. I'm not gonna lie, that's how I was as a kid. I go out there with a bike, I'm being chased down the street. I go out with the chain, somebody's trying to snatch it off. It's not the St. Pete that a lot of y'all know today. And there's some places in St. Pete, well, that's how it was where we were. If you didn't know somebody, you weren't somebody, and you didn't have heart, you better be ready when you step outside. Well, let's just say I learned quick, right? And so in the beginning, it was sad and depressing, but this is where music came into my life. Music came into my life as a refuge, an outlet, all different genres. Of course, if you know me, I'm a hip hop guy, and I can honestly say it probably started with that, but my parents put me on to everything from Bob Marley to Tom Petty and the Traveling Wilburys, right? I had a very diverse music experience from a really young age, and at that time, I needed music more than anything. And what was really big at that time was like grunge. So grunge is also super depressing. You look at people like Kurt Cobain and, all the, what do they call them? The 27 Club, all the people that died of drugs and suicide and everything else by 27. Well, I'm not gonna lie, at 9 years old, I was on that path. I couldn't see my future. I was depressed. I was sad. I had no access to drugs, but I guarantee you at that age, 9 years old, I would have done any drug you put in my face because I needed escape. But at the time, I had no access to that. Music was my escape. You know, by the time I'm 10, it's deeper than that. Right now, I got a bicycle. I'm going out. I'm finding out. You know, people say fuck around and find out. I was fucking around and I was finding out fast. Right? So, I would see my mom come home late at night with shades on, eyes all red. And I'm like, okay, I know my mom got some weed in there. And I would, you know, go up in her room when she'd be doing whatever, looking for weed. And I'll never forget, when I was about 11 years old, I thought I was going in there to find some weed, and I found something else. And it kind of fucked me up because my mom was acting real weird and shit, and I thought that she was just crazy. But now I'm blaming everything on these drugs. And the one thing I could say, the silver lining of all that, is seeing that my mom was on drugs made me not want to do drugs no more. Of course, I wanted to smoke weed. That's not a drug. I considered that a flower, like, you know, that was medicine. And that really, truly was, between music and weed, that would probably save my life. Because if I hadn't found weed, even just the music was going to take me down some suicidal path, listening to Nirvana or some shit, right? I'm just being real with y'all. And that's why to this day, as much as I appreciate those artists and love them, I can't listen to that. I can't listen to grunge and Nirvana because it puts me in like this dark place of when I was a child and when I was suicidal. I'll be real with y'all. I had suicidal tendencies before 11 years old. And so, you know, seeing how drugs controlled my mom. I'm just going to say what it was. It was cocaine, but in my mind, it was crack. Like, to me, it was the same thing. I knew a little something. Like, so what? You put baking soda and drop it in the water. Like, it's the same shit. And I used to get, you know, be real shitty to my mom and call her a crackhead and this and that, which to this day, I mean, of course, I regret talking to my mom like that and treating her like that. But as a kid with no dad, you feel like you're the man of the house and you see things. You don't have structure that you need to thrive and grow. You don't have role models. You know, like my role models early on were fucking junkies, drug addicts, killers, drug dealers. That's what we had in our community. And of course, my sister was very different. She was in the house reading books, soaking up knowledge, writing plays. She was a playwright at 15. When she was 15, I was 12. I was already in the trap. So, you know, there's a lot more about my story that I want to share. But I'll just tell you this. From Arizona to Florida, it was a whole different world, a whole new life. And having a father in prison, trying to raise his son from prison, yeah, I had a dad, and I'm grateful for my dad. I still have a dad, and I love him to this day. But there's definitely that disconnect. You know, you're not there in the house. You don't see what's going on. And every time you're on the phone, you're trying to judge and control the situation. You know, and if I could give anybody any advice that ever goes and does time, and you're trying to control your home and control your kids from another place, you know, I'm a dad now. I can speak from this perspective. It's like, you got to look at what you're putting your family through. You got to look at it like those are the choices that you made. So you got to have empathy for those that you left behind because that was your choice, right? So, you know, that being said, I found my role models in the streets, because how many times are you going to sit there and tell me what to do and you're not even there? You know, and so it's like, you start to look for role models. You know, I mean, unfortunately, my role model, I remember I had a babysitter that I thought was the coolest on the earth. And I'll never forget my two babysitters. I'm not going to call out no names, but it was a female and her boyfriend. And I was 11 years old, and they said, "You want to take something that'll make you fly? Hell yeah. What the fuck you mean? That's the first time I dropped acid when I was 11 years old. And I'm not gonna lie, it fucked me up, y'all. It might have fucked me up for life. Might be what's wrong with me right now. No, but I'm joking. But having these experiences at a young age really helped keep me out of a lot of bullshit as I got older and more wise. But I do want to segue into the street life because it was finding these role models that brought me into the streets. So in this episode, I'm telling you about the early years, right? The beginning of MP and what made MP. So I'm going to close this episode out. And in episode 3, I'm going to talk about my introduction to the streets and how I got involved in the streets. So I appreciate you all checking in. Please, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, like, comment if you're feeling us. If you're listening to us on a streaming platform, make sure you follow us. It's Live Struggle Legacy, episode 2, y'all. We're building pyramids.
Live struggle legacy. It's a whole movement.